Welcome to the Robustly Beneficial AI podcast by the AI Safety Working Group in EPFL, Switzerland.
Today we will talk about the paper Intelligent Autonomous Things in the Battlefield. It's quite an unusual read for our reading group. So far we focused on machine learning and also psychology, looking at the effect of artificial intelligence in the real world on us. But yesterday we talked about this topic, which is autonomous weapon, which is somehow very often mentioned in terms of AI safety.
But I guess what we're mostly thinking, at least what I'm mostly thinking about, is like things like autonomous drones, things that are maybe even small, that can move quickly and stuff like this. We're not thinking of like killer robots from Terminators. I think like the small things that are autonomous are even scarier.
Your kids probably have one of these, right?
For this podcast, we're going to do something a bit unusual. Every now and then I'm going to play an extract from the excellent video by the Future of Life Institute on Slaughterbots.
That skill is all AI. It's flying itself. Its processor can react 100 times faster than a human. The stochastic motion is an anti-sniper feature.
The paper we talked about was called Intelligent Autonomous Things in the Battlefield, which was written by two persons from the US Army, which was a very interesting insight, unusual, I guess.
Unusual in many several aspects. Like one aspect is that a large fraction of AI researchers, or at least those who publish or attend the main venues such as NeurIPS and ICML, recently signed a call against autonomous weapons. This was an initiative by the Future of Life Institute. So we can, with high confidence, say that, like, in general, researchers in machine learning and AI are a priori against any development of autonomous weapons. As the accompanying video from the Future of Life Institute shows, like this was an initiative supported by figures such as Professor Stuart Russell and several others. You can see the list of signatories. So this is a paper where you have the point of view of people for which the existence of autonomous weapon is taken for granted. So there would be autonomous weapon, and they raise concerns of how to make them work. And what is interesting again in this paper is that you realize by scrolling through the paper that mostly, like, you can summarize the paper by saying that to deploy autonomous weapon you have to solve all AI safety problems. I don't know how much you agree with this. Yeah,
that's an interesting aspect. Like when you talk about autonomous weapons, of course, like the safety of it becomes a prime, even if it's your own weapons. Like you want it to work well, and you don't want it to be hacked, and you don't want it to explode out of a sudden. And this raises a lot of robustness concerns. Like how do you get your own weapons to work the way you want them to be working? So in the end, like the challenges to make reliable autonomous weapons is somewhat aligned with the prime of making
robustly beneficial.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and here in the paper we really see that the authors, they are much more concerned about this, but because there is a direct relationship between autonomous weapon and dangers. And this is some things we don't see in papers that talk about a recommender system or image recognitions, these kind of things. We will not hear much about robustness questions, but on this paper about autonomous weapon, throughout all the papers, this was the main topic that they were mentioning.
Yeah, I think it raises there are certain fields in which like robustness is extremely valued. Autonomous weapons is one of them. Another one we talked about yesterday is like the airplane industry. Whenever you're designing algorithms for an airplane, like robustness is extremely important, and there's a lot of investment in it. And yet you can argue, at least it's something to wonder, like, is it really more dangerous in the end than the YouTube algorithm? like a priori, like we have this intuitive feeling that of course, like if the plane crashes, like people die. But in the end, like if you think about the YouTube algorithm, like if it starts to recommend this or this kind of video, like it can have a huge scale impact. So given this, like maybe we should give maybe as much importance to robustness for our recommender systems as we do for these kinds of other applications.
Yeah, it's definitely something that we should try to estimate and evaluate how much lives are at risk for planes or compared to recommender system. As we discussed previously, when a recommender system recommends that you should not vaccinate your kids for XY reasons, then it possibly leads to death of tens of thousands, maybe, of people.
Yeah, which is a lot more than the number of people in the plane.
Yeah.
Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works.
Two other aspects of AI safety that were mentioned in this paper on autonomous weapons. The first one is to be able to do inverse reinforcement learning, because they expect that humans on the battlefields and autonomous weapons will be collaborating with each other. And there is something between humans is that when one starts doing something, the other one right away understands what he's trying to do and goes on and help the teammate. But this is not solved for machines. Machines don't easily interpret our behavior and understand what we want to achieve to help us. So this is the problem called for inverse reinforcement learning, and often something found useful for AI safety.
But like that's the aspect. Maybe that's one of the aspects of the paper that is still a bit futurist, like still not a current concern. There is another aspect in the paper which is already an immediate concern, which is poisoning and evasion.
Yeah.
Like those, I think those would be more immediate problems now than I don't think like we will see in the next year or two deployments of autonomous weapons using inverse reinforcement learning. We still didn't see inverse reinforcement learning for households or for more basic tasks. There is now for like warehouses, a very basic form of reinforcement learning. I don't know, probably some inverse reinforcement learning also by covariants. They recently deployed in Berlin in a warehouse. I know that they do reinforcement learning, so their robots do some form of reinforcement learning. Inverse reinforcement learning, I'm not sure, and maybe not. But yeah, like I think like the most urgent concern in that paper is more on like the robustness.
Yeah, definitely, it was at least 80% of the paper on robustness.
Watch. A $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city. The bad half. Nuclear is obsolete. Take out your entire enemy, virtually risk-free. Just characterize him, release the swarm, and rest easy. These are available today.
Yeah. Another interesting thing that we discussed yesterday is the fact that when we think about war and the army, we tend to think about like physical war, like people on the ground and fighting each other. But there's other kinds of wars, and in particular the US Army is giving more and more importance to other aspects. Like the classical division is between like air, army, like the ground, navy, and then now you also have space. You had space for a long time, and still do. But now you have these two other aspects. One of them is like cyber war. Like everything, like if you can think of, if you manage to paralyze the electrical grid system of another country, like this is a big deal, and you can do a lot of damage in this way. And another one is and the sixth one is public opinion. which is also like a big deal. Like if you get people from another country to turn against each other or against their leader, like it's a big deal.
Well, PsyOps, like psychological operations, existed for long ago. Just like now they're reaching an unprecedented scale with public opinion, the potential to manipulate public opinion using social networks.
Yeah,
and it's just this is not in the scope of the paper, but it's interesting to see, for example, that companies that went to, like Cambridge Analytica, for instance, used to be active in PsyOps.
Yeah.
Before the social media era.
Exactly.
So people who have like expertise in PsyOps are now going to public opinion ops.
Yeah.
With social.
Yeah. There's a very nice video by Smarter Everyday where he interviews, well, he's in the army, I think. Well, he's a military person.
Former
now, I guess.
I don't think you can be a YouTuber and...
Well, I think he was for
was, but I don't think he's active.
While being a YouTuber, okay. But now he's starting a PhD. Well, I don't know everything about him. But anyways, he made this video where it was in collaboration with the army. And he interviewed like a general who talked about these issues. So this really shows that the army not only considers that this is very important, but also, like, I guess one thing that surprised us is, at least me, is that they also communicate on all of these issues.
Well, the paper is an example. This paper, like you have the link on the description of the video, is already a sign. Like there is some form of open discussion on.
It's probably not fully open, but
yes, but at least
and that's arguably surprising. Like I guess other countries don't have, to my knowledge, at least.
Yeah, everything else being equal, I'd rather have armies communicating about their reflection, and why not like listening to researcher and concerns on safety and on the danger of something, than having closed discussion.
Yeah, I feel it could even go the other way around in this case. Like, given how much the army, like this paper cares about robustness, like maybe it can also like influence academics into thinking more about the challenges of robustness, which is very, very difficult. Like, yesterday we also talked about like the potential problems with backdoors in hardware or in firmware. So yeah, there's a lot of concern. Like especially there's one member of the reading group, Sébastien, who knows a lot more than I do about this topic, and what he said is pretty concerning. I'd say.
Yeah, because now like you can not only backdoor your operating system, say Windows or Mac OS, etc., but you can have backdoors in your hardware or firmware, and that's very hard to deal with or detect.
It's very hard to detect as a problem. Maybe it's running on your computer and you have no idea, and you're doing all of these things, and your computer or your machine becomes critical for many tasks. But if it has a backdoor, then it can be interrupted or even attacked, hacked.
They used to say guns don't kill people, people do. Well, people don't. They get emotional, disobey orders, aim high. Let's watch the weapons make the decisions. Now, trust me, these were all bad guys.
Also, the many robustness issues that eventually autonomous weapons would face also raises the question, like, wouldn't like, so I speak for myself, but like, for example, a priori I'm for the fact that society should abandon any form of autonomous weapons. The stakes are very high and the dangers are very high. And it's like maybe like one way we could discuss with people who take them for granted and who consider that this is something they should move to, is that like even for their own interests, the robustness issues are so high and the safety issues are so high that even for an army for itself, it's very dangerous to deploy those kind of autonomous weapons, like because if they just get hacked or controlled in a malicious way, things can go very, very badly.
Yeah, there are specific features of autonomous weapons that could be very concerning. Like one of them is, for instance, the fact that it can be, like if you use an autonomous weapon, like an autonomous drone, to do the killing for you, it can be extremely hard to trace it back to you.
Yes.
And and this is as opposed to other technologies where you usually have some trace.
Maybe just like to speak of like recent conflicts, like for example in Syria are full of stories of terror organizations getting armed because regular armies leave after them positions full of weapons and munitions, etc. So like it would be even a worse nightmare where you can have fleets of autonomous weapons that are abandoned and ready to use by any other organizations. So instead of dealing with regular armies with autonomous weapons, you would start dealing with sporadic terror organizations with available cheap and available autonomous weapons, and that's even scarier.
Yeah, and that's like related to another fact is like maybe the cost of causing a catastrophe is going to go down.
Yes.
And this means that there are more vulnerabilities because like more persons could be a danger.
And now we can't afford to challenge anyone really. It's not even the smallest fringe group or a crank.
Who could have done this?
Anyone.
On this reflection, we mentioned a paper we read a long time ago from Nick Bostrom, which is called the Vulnerable World Hypothesis. And in the paper, he mentioned that as the cost of causing a huge disaster is decreasing because technology becomes more and more advanced and we can have it for cheaper as time goes on, it's possible that it creates a huge risk for humanity if suddenly the price of a nuclear bomb was to be 100 francs, then 100 euro, then we could expect some crazy people that don't care about the world anymore to go on and build one. So maybe this autonomous weapon technology could be one of these type of technology which allow to create a big disaster for a cheap price.
Yeah, and there's also the risk of using it when you're not in the emotional state to be thinking clearly, I guess.
Especially if it does inverse reinforcement learning and not inverse volition learning.
I mean, humans, at least for myself, we do a lot of things that we regret eventually. So you don't want to have a lot of power when you're in a state where you might regret later on what you were thinking or planning. So yeah, I think these are reasons why we should be concerned, I guess, about autonomous weapons.
Yeah. The only points we discussed where we were not fully sure whether it's really useful to completely stop the research on the autonomous weapon was about the question, and it's also something Bostrom says. If someone in the world has autonomous weapons because they did not respect whatever ban we put in place, how do we fight against, or do we defend against such an autonomous weapon? What Nick Bostrom suggesting in his paper, in a world where there is some technology that can create disaster for very cheap, what he suggests is that one of the only options for humanity to survive is to live in a state of total surveillance, where no one is able to create these disasters because everyone is all the time being watched over. And in that case, it's pretty scary stuff. But the paper from Nick Bostrom is very interesting. And in that case, would autonomous weapon be the only way to defend against other actors using autonomous weapons? Yeah,
so we get back to the old American adage that the best thing against a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. But that's the thing is that if we go this path with autonomous weapon, things could get really, really scary. And shootings, like you heard, shooting stories in the US would get orders of magnitude scarier.
So somehow for guns, I totally understand why guns in school is not the solution against people shooting guns in schools, obviously. But then I don't know how this transfers to the argument about
because say you have
weapons.
A fleet of autonomous weapons protecting civilians, and then there is a malicious actor who wants to attack those civilians with with a fleet of autonomous weapons, you can have a more malicious attacker who instead of deploying her or his own fleet could just hack the fleet that was aimed to protect.
Yeah, definitely. So before we build even one fleet,
Right.
it's obvious that we need to have solved the problem of robustness from all sides.
This sounds utopic, but like maybe a very reasonable path to consider is that society should have a strong stance against it, similar to the ones we have on biological weapons and chemical weapons.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
And then hope that it won't develop at scale under the radar.
Government sources admit the intelligence community has no idea who perpetrated the attack, nor whether it was a state, group, or even a single individual.
I guess the big question is like what can be done against this threat, or like how to make either autonomous weapons a lot more robust, but probably even more like reduce the spread of this. Like just like we have gun control in many countries in the world, maybe we should have autonomous weapon control.
But like besides control, you have, yeah, of course, it's very hard to scale education, but like social incentives seems to be very fast to scale.
Yeah,
like you could have countries that moved from one like social incentive to another in a very fast, like think of like women's rights or women's votes, like a country like Switzerland, it happened within a decade that from no, this shouldn't happen to, well, of course this is standard. Yeah. So maybe we can think of like a social incentive that makes deploying or using autonomous weapons just extremely negatively incentivized by society.
Yeah, and I think the analogy here with biological weapons and chemical weapons is interesting because they have been banned, but also like very frowned upon, and maybe like the fact that they were officially frowned upon like this was actually more impactful, even more so than the fact that they were actually banned. And unfortunately. So a little story is that when Cédric Villani at some point came to the United Nations and he was asked this question, like he was asked like, should we ban autonomous weapons? And he was very evasive about this question. So he was not giving the social incentives to frown upon this kind of research and technology development, which I think is like very worrying. Like I think. Like we should be more frowning upon these things.
Maybe to stay on this analogy with what happened in biological weapons and chemical weapons is that very quickly it became obvious for everyone that they can very easily go wrong, and the effects would be bad for everyone. Like everyone is losing. Yeah. We can imagine a scenario where powerful countries like US, Russia, China, etc. just have settle for an agreement that this if anyone deploys this, it's bad for everyone else. So let's just have a gentle agreement, like a strong agreement between powerful countries that no one should deploy this because everyone will lose.
Yeah, definitely. Like more generally, I think like for these kinds of questions, like the zero-sum game mindset is very dangerous.
Yes, everyone should realize that this is a negative-sum game.
Yeah, and
like biological weapons.
Yeah, and unfortunately, like if you think about like the way there's a lot of discourse, for instance, of AI race, something like this, where there's this message that we are in a competition and there's going to be a winner and losers. And I think this is like very, very, very bad for safety. If more people realize or believe that it's non-zero-sum game, we can be both winners or we can be both losers, or all of us. I think this is very important, to slow down.
Authorities are still struggling to make sense of an attack on university campuses worldwide, which targeted some students and not others.
Also, one of the earliest points, like the point that the paper by those two researchers from the US military, basically say to deploy this safely, we need to solve all of AI safety research. This is just this is a strong argument for having a moratorium on autonomous weapons, because we are not any close to solving AI safety research.
Exactly.
And this really should be pointed out. This really should be stressed. AI safety is very, very, very hard. I think we've discussed it a lot here, but it's very, very hard to get algorithms to do what we want them to be doing all the time. Like maybe it's also relevant because yesterday we also talked about like autonomous cars, and autonomous cars can be used as if they are hacked, they can be very, very dangerous. And well, especially the discussion with Sebastian here, like, was not reassuring to me, well, at all. The fact that there can be liabilities in the hardware that cannot be detected
by the software.
By the software is a big concern.
Yeah, basically, I think to summarize, he said that if someone else is building the hardware on which you are running any software, then there is really no solution to detect whether the hardware you are given is exactly what you thought it is or not. And in that case, they could have a program that at some point overrides whatever your machine, maybe an autonomous car or an autonomous weapon, is doing, and start doing something else.
Yeah, and he was also saying that it's all very secretive. Like all of this, like it's very hard to verify anything in the process.
Yeah, and also that is the chain to build such hardware is so complex. There are so many steps that it would be extremely costly to decide that now the US military by themselves build everything from scratch. It would be extremely difficult.
Yeah, and every step is a vulnerability, so
exactly.
they add up, which is not reassuring.
Maybe one difference between we talked about the ban on a chemical weapon and it works well. But one thing that I think worked well is that also no one is doing research on improving chemical weapons. But for autonomous weapon, I feel that we are still officially. I feel that we are still doing the research that is useful to build autonomous weapons. Like computer vision is definitely something very useful for autonomous weapons. Improving drones is something useful for autonomous weapons. Building autonomous cars, similar software, similar machine learning techniques could be used in autonomous weapons. So here it raises the question whether putting a ban on autonomous weapon will really stop the knowledge to come up. So this is one thing that Nick Bostrom says, that when the knowledge of a technology that can cause disaster come up and is available to the public, then this is when the technology becomes dangerous, because people could do it. And a possibility would be to try to hide this knowledge, but I fear that for autonomous weapon, this is not a possibility.
Yeah, I think that there's a big risk that this gets democratized, and you don't want. I don't think we want the democratization of such powerful technologies.
Yeah, and I don't know. So it's also similar to the research being done with the GPT-2 or with deepfakes. That we release this research, and we have this question that is quite important: whether it might be used by bad actors and improve the way bad actors manipulate or do bad things in the world.
Yeah. One thing that's discussed also in the Vulnerable World Hypothesis paper by Bostrom is the fact that as researchers we can also choose what we want to focus on, and rather than just doing what excites us the most or whatever, maybe we can think of directing our research towards more defensive mechanisms and defensive technologies. Unfortunately for autonomous weapons, it's not clear what these defensive technologies would be. But maybe a push for robustness, or raising also the awareness within research of the challenges of robustness it could be one way to go.
Smart weapons consume data. When you can find your enemy using data, even by a hashtag, you can target an evil ideology right where it starts.
maybe the last point we didn't cover, we plan to cover, is like the privacy problem, or the privacy dilemma. Like you mentioned at some point that like there are some scenarios where the only intuitive solution is full surveillance, which sounds very scary maybe to people who didn't think about the problem, and which is arguably something everyone would like to avoid.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to develop more on the privacy versus safety dilemma. Like here we have a privacy safety dilemma that could become strong.
Yeah, so the explanation is that if there is a very cheap way to create a disaster, then if we don't watch over everyone at all time, then it could be that someone is doing it. And we expect that someone in the world might do it because there are people with mental illness or people that for some reason are able to do things like kill themselves while killing many others and decide to do these kind of things.
One counter argument would again come from like very well educated countries like Scandinavian countries, where the fact that society has developed a standard of living that is good for almost anyone, and then there are like social incentives.
Yeah, but you think that even in a country like this, out of 10 million people, there won't be one that is sufficiently sick or misleaded to create such a disaster. So I think out of 10 million people, there is one that will do something at random.
But by the way, it happened in Norway in 2011.
Yeah.
So like the good thing about Scandinavian countries is that shootings are so rare, you speak about them a decade later, not a week later or a few days later. So yeah, it happened in Norway where 70 people were killed by this terrorist called Breivik.
Okay.
And yeah, you might argue that maybe we would have rare events of larger scale. That's what you want to say, right?
Yes.
Even though it's rare, even though like
similarly rare,
shootings are rare in very
large-scale.
well-educated countries with very high standards of living, but with autonomous weapons, they would have a large scale.
Yeah, and then to make them more rare, you need all countries to be as educated as Norway, and this is not something you can achieve. So yeah, it sounds that if there is this possibility of creating disaster easily, then to avoid it, we would need to watch what people are doing at all time.
Yeah,
I don't see any other ways out of this at all time.
Yeah, so it's very challenging because I think we all want privacy, at least a little bit of it, but there's a risk with privacy. I think there's a trade-off.
Oh, clearly.
It's important to insist that there is a trade-off, and maybe we have different, depending on how afraid we are of the risks and how much we value privacy. We are probably in different position in this trade-off. But I think it's important to take into account like everything if possible. But personally, when I realized more and more the danger of such technologies, like it made me push a little bit my own cursor. But yeah, I think it's a difficult trade-off.
Well, here it's not an obvious like the trade like utility privacy is always like a hard trade-off to rule on, and now we have like the safety privacy trade-off, which is even harder to rule on. But on the other side, like you can argue that the technology to have safety by surveillance is not ready to use, and it's also not vulnerable, and then you just push the problem to the other side, and then,
and it's not robust.
and then malicious and then it's not robust, and then malicious actors could play on the surveillance technology instead of playing on the
exactly.
So you're just like postponing the problem somewhere else, in some sense.
Yeah, sounds correct.
So they're like the same arguments, the same AI is not robust and is not ready to use argument that we could use to tell people like please reconsider any deployment or of autonomous things. Could be said also about safety by privacy technology.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not robust, and it might produce more harm than good.
So
if it's not ready to use, and it is not ready to use.
Yeah, so I guess whether you value privacy or safety, in both cases, like probably should work on robustness.
Yeah, it's a very good point. We need to build things that robustly beneficial. Otherwise, whatever is basically the concept of robustness is that your intention is inside what you've built and it cannot go in a different direction. If you don't have this, then whatever is your intention, the thing you build will do something different.
Exactly. Especially when you realize that like both sides have the same intention, protecting humans. We assume that like every side of the discussion have the same intention. And then some say, well, to protect civilian, like to save lives, we have to watch out with surveillance. And then the others like, to save lives, we have to. And then like they all face the same problem, which is, do you have robust decision-making, automated decision-making algorithms to guarantee that what you deploy would ensure your intention? And that's
unfortunately
the heart of the problem and the heart of why we started this working group, this podcast.
So let's work on robustness.
I think you can't find a better conclusion.
Good. So I hope you've enjoyed this discussion. And next time we'll be discussing reinforcement learning, in particular a recent paper by Google DeepMind on an evolution of AlphaZero, who has now become MuZero. And it's an interesting paper because it bridges the gap between reinforcement learning for very well-specified problems like games and things that are more complex, like the applications, real-life applications we care about, like for instance on YouTube. Thanks, and hope we'll see you next time.
This short film is more than just speculation. It shows the results of integrating and miniaturizing technologies that we already have. I'm Stuart Russell, a professor of computer science at Berkeley. I've worked in AI for more than 35 years. Its potential to benefit humanity is enormous, even in defense. But allowing machines to choose to kill humans will be devastating to our security and freedom. Thousands of my fellow researchers agree. We have an opportunity to prevent the future you just saw, but the window to act is closing fast.